I mean, I also read my namesake, Catherine Maher, was head of NPR, and, she said, "We're completely unbiased. Give me a break, lady." NPR said, "It sounds like Chappelle is using white privilege to excuse his homophobia and transphobia." Wait, now Dave Chappelle can have white privilege? I'm really confused now.
Bill Maher abruptly broke with NPR as the network faced accusations of pro-democratic bias. Given his long-standing ties to the Democratic establishment, many assumed he would defend the outlet. Instead, Maher took a confrontational stance, directly challenging NPR credibility in a blunt and unapologetic critique that stunned viewers nationwide.
The heads of NPR and PBS testified before Congress this week amid accusations of liberal bias. Should the government continue to send taxpayer dollars to public broadcasters? Well, a little background here. I mean, they've been after them the Republicans have wanted to get rid of PBS for as long as I can remember. This crowd will probably do it. I mean, I also read my namesake, Catherine Maher, was head of NPR, and, she said, "We're completely unbiased. Give me a break, lady." I mean, they're crazy far left.
This is classic Bill Maher, saying out loud what others only whisper, with little concern for who might be offended. In Maher's view, NPR isn't just leaning left, it is firmly embedded on the far left, regardless of how strongly its executives insist on neutrality and objectivity. That is where Maher draws the line. No serious observer expects a major media organization to openly admit its biases, but pretending those biases don't exist is another matter entirely. Maher argues that presenting oneself as neutral while consistently advancing a single ideological perspective is dishonest and, worse, insulting to the audience intelligence. From his perspective, NPR has grown so comfortable in its ideological lane that it can no longer recognize its own slant. The problem, he says, isn't that NPR has opinions everyone does, but that it denies having them. His critique carries extra weight precisely because it comes from someone often aligned with NPR politically, making it far harder to dismiss as mere partisan noise.
I mean, I think we're past the age, really, where the government, first of all, why do we need to subsidize? Why can't we have outlets like this? And we're so polarized. These outlets became popular at a time when Republicans and Democrats didn't hate each other and weren't at each other's throats and didn't think each other was an existential threat. In that world, you can't have places like this, I think, anymore. They have to be private.
Maher advances a case that's hard to dismiss. When an organization like NPR receives government funding, questions about independence, accountability, and outside influence inevitably follow even in the absence of direct interference. Perception alone can undermine public trust. As Maher argues, this is why privatization makes sense. A publicly funded media outlet can come to be viewed as aligned with those in power, particularly in a political climate as polarized as today. The stakes are now too high for public media to credibly claim neutrality while relying on taxpayer dollars. NPR may once have served as a unifying force, but in an era defined by ideological division and cultural fracture, that role feels increasingly outdated. Going private wouldn't silence NPR. It would require the organization to stand solely on its credibility, audience support, and transparency. And if NPR truly believes in its own neutrality, privatization would be the clearest way to prove it.
They should just let go of the funding. I love NPR. I listen to NPR almost every day, have since 1975, when my parents used to play it in our Chevrolet Caprice when I was like 9 years old. I love it for its point of view, but since 2020, it has no longer been general. I remember in 2021, my then 9-year-old asked me, and of course she has no sense of context, I don't pump her full of things like this. She said from the back seat, in a very different car, she said, "Daddy, why is it that NPR is always playing the same thing?" And I said, "What do you mean the same thing?" And I swear she said, now she doesn't have a vocabulary, but she said, "It's always about how somebody can't do something."
Concerns about NPR alleged bias intensified after revelations surrounding its edited interview with Kamala Harris. Editing interviews is standard practice. News outlets routinely trim conversations for time, remove awkward pauses, or cut irrelevant tangents. That routine process wasn't the controversy. What troubled critics was the extent of the edits. Leaked footage appeared to show NPR going far beyond simple cleanup, restructuring Harris' answers in ways critics argue significantly changed how her responses came across compared to the original exchange. At that point, they contend, the line was crossed. The outlet was no longer editing for clarity but shaping perception. For skeptics, the episode reinforced long-standing suspicions that NPR does more than report the news, instead framing coverage in ways they believe favor certain political figures. Whether intentional or not, the controversy weakened NPR claims of neutrality and gave critics fresh grounds to question which voices the network truly amplifies.
And that what she was getting at was that. I wouldn't have said that about the NPR that I knew back in the day, and I wouldn't have said it 10 years ago, but that is what it is now. I will listen to it daily, but it's no longer a general audience venue. They should just give up national funding. Yeah.
Maher fully embraces that conclusion. From his standpoint, NPR should no longer receive public funding. If the network operated as a fully private entity, its political leanings, whatever they may be, would be transparent and understood. Audiences already recognize this dynamic. No one is surprised when Fox News leans right or MSNBC tilts left because they are private enterprises shaped by ownership, advertisers, and audience demand. Their biases are built into their brands. NPR, by contrast, continues to cloak itself in the language of public service and neutrality while accepting taxpayer dollars from people across the political spectrum. That contradiction is what Maher finds unacceptable. Privatization, he argues, would not silence NPR or diminish its reach. It would simply remove the pretense. Free from public funding, NPR could state its positions openly without claiming to speak for everyone. In today's deeply polarized media landscape, Maher suggests that honesty may be more valuable than neutrality ever was.
I'm just going to read this one from NPR. It's because the reviews from the critics so at variance with the audience. Rotten Tomatoes, that's a amalgam of reviews. I think in this case 7. His special got a 43%. Audience 95. Says a lot about the differentiation between real people and the...
At this point, Maher points to what he sees as a clear example of NPR ideological tilt. Several years ago, comedian Dave Chappelle sparked backlash after making jokes about the trans community, provoking anger within activist circles. The reaction escalated quickly, with online outrage, calls for cancellation, and pressure on platforms to distance themselves from his work. NPR coverage of the controversy soon came under scrutiny. The outlet prominently highlighted a sharply critical review of Chappelle's comedy special, awarding it a low 4 out of 10. What it did not emphasize, Maher notes, was that audiences overwhelmingly disagreed, rating the same special closer to a 9 out of 10. To Maher, that disparity illustrates a broader pattern. This wasn't simply a difference in taste, it was selective framing. By elevating elite criticism while downplaying audience response, NPR appeared less like a neutral observer and more like a cultural gatekeeper, subtly guiding listeners toward a preferred conclusion.
I don't have any problem with Latinx, but it doesn't seem to be making any inroads into the communities where most Latinx people live. And so you have this sort of educated dialect way of thinking. And that's the case here, where all of these people, I think, to get back to this simplicity idea, they see that Dave Chappelle is a comedian. There are layers of wit and irony and attitude going on. And instead, we're told to just read it as if it was the Three Bears. And we're being told that that's sophisticated, when really that means that these people who are, so annoyed that anybody says some words or expresses some ideas are saying that most of America aren't sophisticated.
Maher Guest pushes the argument further, suggesting that the so-called woke police are motivated more by spectacle than by substance. In his view, the goal isn't truly to silence someone like Dave Chappelle or to seriously address the issues they claim to defend. What matters most is the performance, the public display of fighting for a morally righteous cause. Real-world consequences or practical solutions, he argues, are largely secondary. That, he says, is why these activists so often latch on to controversies that have little direct effect on their own lives.
Because you don't agree with what he said, which again, I don't think is transphobic. A lot of the special is about how he has this friendship with a trans person who is his opening act.
Maher's argument ultimately comes down to agency and accountability. Comedy, in his view, doesn't create hatred, it reflects the uncomfortable truths, tensions, and contradictions that already exist in society. Singling out comedians becomes a convenient shortcut for media outlets that prefer outrage to nuance, allowing them to avoid deeper, more complicated conversations.
Now let me read the NPR. NPR said, it sounds like Chappelle is using white privilege to excuse his homophobia and transphobia. Wait, now Dave Chappelle can have white privilege? I'm really confused now.
This is exactly why Maher argues that NPR should be defunded. In one critique, the outlet suggested that Dave Chappelle was operating from white privilege, a claim many found not only absurd but revealing. Chappelle, one of America's most prominent black comedians, has built a career shaped by experiences far removed from the simplistic notion of privilege NPR applied. This went beyond a mere difference of opinion, it was ideological language overriding reality. What makes it especially troubling is that this framing came from a media organization partially funded by taxpayers. When publicly supported outlets insert activist buzzwords into narratives where they don't belong, public trust erodes. Maher's concern isn't about defending Chappelle, it's about principle. If publicly funded media can bend concepts like privilege to fit a political script, true neutrality becomes impossible, making defunding a logical solution. His critique extends far beyond one comedian or a single controversial joke. It speaks to the broader issue of media integrity and accountability. Publicly funded organizations like NPR claim neutrality, but coverage like the Chappelle episode exposes a consistent pattern of ideological bias, selective framing, and moral posturing. When taxpayer dollars support media that shapes narratives to suit a political agenda, trust erodes and polarization deepens. Maher contends that privatization is the only way to make NPR leanings transparent. Much like Fox News or MSNBC, whether through edited interviews, amplifying elite critiques, or weaponizing woke outrage, the pattern is unmistakable. NPR has shifted from reporting to messaging. Maher's pointed critique shows why reform or even defunding is long overdue. And that wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.